You ever wonder what actually makes an avoidant person stop avoiding? To finally hit the brakes and turn around? To look at the person in front of them and say, I'm ready. I'm ready to commit. I'm ready to stay. I'm ready to show up. If you've ever loved or tried to love an avoidant, you already know how confusing, frustrating, and exhausting it can be. One moment they're texting you nonstop. They're all in. They're making plans. They're pulling you close. And then, out of nowhere, they vanish. Silence. Withdrawal. That wall of cold distance that feels like it slams down without warning. And you're left staring at your phone, retracing every single step, overanalyzing every word you sent, asking yourself, did I push too hard? Did I say something wrong? Did I want too much? Suddenly it's 2 a.m., and you're Googling attachment theory, desperate for answers, hoping there's some code you can crack that will finally explain why this person who clearly cares for you keeps disappearing. Here's the part that stings, and I'll be blunt because you deserve the truth. It's not about you. You cannot fix an avoidant. You cannot love them enough to rewrite their patterns. You cannot text them the perfect words that suddenly make them wake up and commit. Change doesn't come from your effort. It only comes when they decide to stop running. And I know that hurts because if you're like me, at some point you've thought, maybe I'll be the exception. Maybe I'll be the one who finally breaks through. But it doesn't work that way. Avoidants don't change because someone saves them. They change because life confronts them with something bigger than their fear. And that's what we're going to unpack together today. But before we go deeper, let's set the stage. Avoidant attachment isn't just a personality quirk, it's a survival strategy. Imagine a child who grows up in an environment where closeness is unpredictable, where expressing needs led to rejection, where vulnerability felt unsafe. That child learns, without words, that the safest way to survive is to shut down emotions, to pull away, to depend only on themselves. Fast forward to adulthood, and now you have someone who can be charming, funny, intelligent, even deeply caring. But the moment intimacy feels too real, their nervous system hits the panic button. It's not always logical, and it's not about you being too much. It's about their body and brain interpreting closeness as danger. So instead of leaning in, they retreat. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that hot and cold dance, you know how disorienting it is. One day, you're wrapped up in the warmth of connection, feeling like you've finally found your person. And the next, it's silence, distance, the cold edge of withdrawal. It messes with your head because your brain keeps chasing the high of those good moments. You remember how good it felt when they were present, and so you keep waiting, hoping, bargaining, thinking if I just love them right, maybe this time they'll stay. But here's the tough truth. You cannot love someone out of avoidance. The only thing that makes them stop running is when something forces them to look in the mirror and face themselves. So, what actually does that? What breaks the cycle? What makes someone who has spent their entire life dodging intimacy finally stop avoiding? The answers are not what you might expect, and they don't come from romantic gestures or being endlessly patient. They come from turning points, real-life moments that shake them to the core. Sometimes it's meeting someone who refuses to play their game, someone who won't chase, won't enable, and holds boundaries so firm that the avoidant realizes for the first time, I have to grow up or lose this. Sometimes it's regret, the heavy weight of losing someone who truly loved them, a loss that lingers and forces them to finally face their patterns. And sometimes it's not about love at all. It's about their own body collapsing under the pressure of decades of suppressed emotions, anxiety, sleepless nights, panic attacks, forcing them to stop running and start healing. Avoidants don't stop avoiding because you push harder. They stop when life becomes unbearable if they keep running. Let me tell you a story to bring this to life. There was a guy I knew back in high school, the classic player. You know the type. Charming, funny, magnetic, the life of every room, the one who made you feel like you were the only person that mattered, even though he was juggling half a dozen girls at once. Nobody really trusted him, not the women he dated, not even his guy friends. He was reckless, addicted to the chase, impossible to pin down. And honestly, we all thought, this man is never going to settle down. Fast forward 10 years, married, kids, and not just married, actually a phenomenal husband, a devoted father, completely transformed. The kind of change that makes you stop in your tracks. How did that happen? When I asked him, he laughed at first and said, "My wife." But then he explained. Every woman before had forgiven him, tolerated his hot and cold, bent over backwards, and that meant he never had to change. But she was different. She didn't chase. She didn't budge. She saw through him and wasn't impressed. She made him work for her love for the first time in his life. And when he realized he could lose her, that was the wake-up call. Then came his second turning point, becoming a father. Holding that baby in his arms, he realized the old ways couldn't work anymore. He had to show up consistently, fully, or lose everything. That 1-2 punch broke the pattern. Not because someone fixed him, but because life forced him to evolve. Now here's the takeaway. Avoidants stop avoiding when something interrupts the comfort of their cycle. When chasing, withdrawing, and running no longer works. It's not your job to create that moment. It's not your job to rescue them. Your job is to stand so firmly in your own worth, your own boundaries, that they can no longer use you as an escape route from themselves. Because sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for an avoidant is stop chasing them, stop enabling, stop waiting, and let them feel the silence they created. That's when the mirror appears. That's when the possibility of change begins. Here's the thing about avoidants. Their lives are usually structured to help them keep running. They're busy, they're productive, they're independent, and they surround themselves with distractions that allow them to avoid looking too closely at what's missing. On the surface, it looks like they've got it together. Great career, social life, maybe even hobbies or fitness routines that keep them moving forward. But underneath, there's often a quiet ache, a loneliness they won't admit, not even to themselves. And most of the time, they can drown it out with routines, with work, with entertainment, until something cracks the pattern. That crack can come in many forms. Sometimes it's a health scare. Imagine an avoidant who's spent years telling themselves, "I don't need anyone, I'm fine on my own," only to suddenly end up in a hospital bed after an accident or illness. In that moment, when they realize nobody's there to hold their hand, when they feel the emptiness of all the walls they built, it hits them in a way nothing else could. Suddenly, the very independence they once worshipped feels hollow, even dangerous. It's in moments like these that avoidants begin to question, what am I running from, and what am I running toward? Because life has a way of reminding us that no one can truly do it all alone, and for someone avoidant, that reminder can be a powerful turning point. Another kind of crack comes through love lost. This one is more familiar. They meet someone who genuinely loves them, someone who shows patience, kindness, and a willingness to connect, but true to form, the avoidant eventually pulls away. They disappear, retreat, and in their mind, they're safe again. Only later, maybe months or even years later, they realize the person they lost wasn't just another fleeting connection. That person was real, that person mattered, and the regret begins to seep in. You see, regret is one of the few emotions strong enough to break through an avoidant's defenses. They don't like to feel it, but when it's unavoidable, it lingers. It keeps them awake at night. It makes them replay the memories, the way they pushed someone away who only wanted to love them. And over time, regret can transform into a motivation to finally face their patterns, to finally stop running. Let me share another story here. A woman I worked with once told me about her older brother. He was the classic dismissive avoidant. Sharp, witty, incredibly successful in his career, but absolutely hopeless when it came to relationships. He'd date for a few months, then ghost. He was charming enough that women kept giving him chances, but he never lasted. Until one woman came along who changed everything. She was patient but not a pushover. She didn't chase him, but she made it clear she cared. He pulled away, like always, and she let him go. No drama, no begging, no angry messages, just silence and dignity. Months later, he came back, expecting to pick up where they left off. But she had moved on. She had met someone else who valued her. That was the first time in his life he felt the full sting of loss. He confessed later that it haunted him. For the first time, he realized, I pushed away the one person who truly saw me. That regret didn't just break his heart. It broke his pattern. It forced him to look at himself, to confront why he kept running, to finally admit that maybe the problem wasn't everyone else. Maybe the problem was him. This is where the psychology gets fascinating. Avoidants are masters at convincing themselves they're fine, that they don't need love, that relationships are messy and unnecessary. But humans aren't built that way. Connection is wired into us at the deepest level. When avoidants finally hit that wall, whether it's through illness, loss, or loneliness, that can no longer be ignored, they start to realize that avoidance is not strength. It's fear. And fear cannot sustain a life. Fear cannot build a home. Fear cannot raise children, or hold someone through sickness, or share the beauty of growing old together. Fear can only build walls, and eventually, those walls start to feel like a prison. But here's the twist. Avoidants don't usually wake up one morning and say, "That's it, I'm done avoiding." It's a slower unraveling. It's a series of small realizations, subtle awakenings. They notice they're lonely even in a crowd. They notice their independence doesn't feel as satisfying as it used to. They notice their old coping strategies, work, distractions, casual dating, no longer numb the ache inside. And gradually, the cost of avoiding becomes greater than the fear of connecting. That's when change begins. That's when the possibility of showing up, fully and authentically, starts to emerge. Now let's pause here for a moment, because if you're listening to this and you love an avoidant, you might be tempted to think, okay, so how do I trigger that moment? How do I make them realize what they're losing before it's too late? And here's the answer you might not want to hear. You can't. You cannot manufacture their turning point. You cannot create their regret for them. You cannot orchestrate their epiphany. What you can do is hold your boundaries, live in your truth, and stop sacrificing yourself in the hope they'll wake up. Because the moment you stop chasing, stop fixing, stop trying to save them, you create the space where their own realizations can emerge. Without that space, they'll keep running. With it, they might just stop. And when they do stop, it's not always dramatic. It doesn't look like a Hollywood moment where they show up at your door in the rain, begging for forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like a quiet message out of nowhere. Sometimes it looks like them showing up consistently, little by little, testing whether they can truly stay. And sometimes it looks like therapy, personal growth, self-reflection that happens long before they're ready to re-enter a relationship. The important thing is that it's theirs, their journey, their decision, not something you forced, but something they chose. When we look closely at avoidance, it's not just about someone being afraid of commitment. That's the surface level description. Underneath, avoidance is almost always rooted in early attachment experiences. Think about it. No child is born afraid of love. Babies come into the world wired for connection. They cry, they reach, they cling, because love and safety are survival. But what happens when a child's early attempts at connection are met with inconsistency, neglect, or even punishment? They learn a painful lesson. Closeness isn't safe. Intimacy hurts. Vulnerability equals rejection. And so, they adapt. They build walls. They create distance. They convince themselves they don't need anyone because needing feels too dangerous. That adaptation may help them survive childhood, but fast forward to adulthood, and those walls become a prison. On the outside, avoidance looks strong, independent, even enviable. But inside, they're starving for connection while simultaneously running from it. And this is the paradox that defines their lives. The thing they want most, love, closeness, security, is the very thing they fear the most. And until something shifts that internal equation, avoidance will remain their default. Now here's where real life provides some of the most powerful lessons. I once worked with a woman who had been married to an avoidant man for over a decade. In the early years, she mistook his independence for confidence. She admired the way he didn't need her. But over time, that distance became painful. She found herself constantly guessing where she stood, craving affection that rarely came, feeling like she was alone even while married. She tried everything, being more loving, being more patient, even pulling away herself to see if he'd notice. Sometimes he did, briefly, but the cycle always returned. She finally told me, it felt like being married to a shadow. He was there, but not really there. Eventually, she reached her breaking point. She filed for divorce, not in anger, but in exhaustion. And here's the twist. That was the moment her husband finally began to wake up. He begged for another chance, not with manipulation this time, but with tears, with honesty. For the first time, he admitted he was terrified of intimacy, terrified of not being enough, terrified of needing her. She didn't take him back, but his pain became his teacher. Losing her forced him into therapy, forced him to examine the patterns he had avoided his whole life. And though their marriage ended, his healing journey began. Years later, he remarried, and this time, he showed up fully. He said to me once, I wish I could have woken up sooner. But sometimes, you don't change until the cost of staying the same becomes unbearable. Psychologically, this is critical. Avoidants don't change because they see the light. They change because they feel the heat. Pain, whether it's regret, loss, loneliness, or anxiety, becomes the only force strong enough to challenge their defenses. Love alone won't do it. Patience alone won't do it. Sacrifice alone won't do it. It's only when the shield of avoidance begins to harm them more than it protects them that transformation becomes possible. Another powerful example, a man I met at a psychology conference shared his story of being an avoidant husband and father. He admitted that for years he kept his wife at arm's length and barely engaged with his kids. Work was his refuge. He provided financially, but emotionally, he was absent. Then one day, his teenage daughter broke down and said, Dad, I don't even know you. You're like a stranger in this house. That shattered him. He realized in that moment that his avoidance wasn't just protecting him. It was destroying the very people he loved most. That was his wake-up call. He sought therapy, not because his wife begged him, but because his daughter's pain pierced through the armor he had built for decades. And step by step, he began to learn how to show up, not perfectly, but consistently. This brings us to an important truth. Avoidants don't just need relationships to change. They need reflection. They need moments that stop them in their tracks, moments that force them to face what their avoidance costs. Not just for themselves, but for the people around them, because avoidance isn't a neutral strategy. It leaves scars on partners, on children, on friends. And when avoidants finally see the impact of their running, sometimes that's the mirror that changes everything. Now let's talk about the process of change. Avoidants who choose to heal often begin with therapy, but healing isn't about erasing avoidance overnight. It's about learning to sit with discomfort. For an avoidant, letting someone in feels like standing in fire. Their instinct is to run, to shut down, to distract. But with practice, they can learn to stay, to breathe, to tolerate the closeness instead of fleeing from it. One therapist put it beautifully. Healing avoidance isn't about tearing down walls overnight. It's about learning to open one window at a time. And when avoidants begin to heal, something remarkable happens. They don't just become better partners, they become more whole as people. They learn that vulnerability is not weakness, but strength. They learn that love doesn't suffocate, it liberates. They learn that true intimacy isn't about losing yourself, it's about being fully yourself with another. So here's the big takeaway for part 3. Avoidants stop avoiding when life gives them no other option. When loss, regret, or reflection forces them to confront what they've been running from. And when they finally choose to heal, the journey isn't fast or easy, but it is possible. Avoidance is not destiny. It's a pattern, and patterns can be broken. Here's the truth that most people don't want to hear. You cannot force an avoidant to change. You cannot love them into security. You cannot sacrifice yourself into becoming their wake-up call. But you can control how you respond. And sometimes the way you respond becomes the catalyst for either their growth or your freedom. So let's break down some strategies that not only protect you, but also set the stage for the only kind of change that actually sticks. 1. Boundaries over begging. When you're with an avoidant, the temptation is to keep trying harder. Maybe if you send the right text, maybe if you stay patient a little longer, maybe if you give them space and then welcome them back, maybe then they'll change. But as we've seen, all that does is reinforce their behavior. The real shift happens when you draw a clear boundary, not as a punishment, but as a declaration of your worth. For example, one woman I coached told her avoidant boyfriend, "I love you, but I will not be in a relationship where disappearing is acceptable. If you need space, you need to communicate it. If you ghost me again, I'm done." He didn't take her seriously at first, until she followed through. When he pulled away again, she walked. That was his wake-up call, not because she begged, but because she refused to settle for crumbs. And whether he changed or not, she reclaimed her power. 2. Stop personalizing their behavior. One of the cruelest parts of loving an avoidant is the way it makes you question yourself. You replay every word, every text, every interaction, wondering what you did wrong. But avoidance is not about you. It's about their fear of closeness, their learned strategies of self-protection. The moment you stop internalizing their behavior as a reflection of your worth, you take back your peace. You realize their running doesn't mean I'm unlovable. It means they're afraid, and that clarity changes everything. 3. Don't rescue them from consequences. Here's the paradox. As long as you protect an avoidant from the pain of their own choices, they have no reason to change. If you keep taking them back, keep forgiving without accountability, keep smoothing over the damage, you are actually delaying their growth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let reality teach them the lessons you can't. It might be losing you. It might be facing their own loneliness. It might be the collapse of a relationship they thought would always be there. But until they feel that weight, they will not face themselves. 4. Focus on your healing, not theirs. This is the hardest but most liberating truth. Your job is not to fix them. Your job is to protect your own heart, your own self-worth, your own future. That means investing in your own growth. Therapy, journaling, building healthy support systems, reconnecting with your passions. Because here's the beautiful irony. The more you heal your own patterns, the less tolerance you have for unhealthy dynamics. And that, in itself, shifts the entire equation. Sometimes that's the exact mirror an avoidant needs. Sometimes it's the thing that finally forces them to rise or step out. Either way, you win. 5. Redefine what winning means. Too often, people see winning as finally getting the avoidant to commit. But true winning is not about getting them back. It's about either experiencing them rise to meet you at your standards, or freeing yourself to find love that already matches them. Both outcomes are victories. Because either way, you're no longer stuck in limbo, waiting, hoping, suffering. You've taken back control of your story. Let me tell you one more story to drive this home. A client of mine dated a dismissive avoidant for years. Every time he pulled away, she chased. Every time he ghosted, she forgave. Every time he sabotaged, she made excuses. Until one day, she broke the cycle. She told him, "I'm not going to teach you how to love me. Either you show up or I move on," he laughed. He didn't believe her, so she moved on. And here's the twist. 6 months later, he came back, not with empty promises, but with proof of change. Therapy, accountability, effort. And this time, she didn't rush back. She watched. She tested. She made him earn it. And today, they're married. Not because she rescued him, but because she stopped rescuing him. That difference changed everything. So here's the takeaway for you. Avoidants don't stop avoiding because you chase harder. They stop when reality catches up with them, when boundaries replace begging, when consequences replace enabling, and when your self-respect shines brighter than your fear of losing them. And remember this, even if your avoidant never changes, even if they keep running forever, you still win. Because you've chosen you. You've chosen peace, clarity, and love that doesn't require you to beg for scraps. Let's bring this full circle. If you've made it this far, it means you care. Maybe you're in love with an avoidant right now. Maybe you've just left one. Or maybe you're still haunted by the push and pull of a past relationship. Wherever you are, I need you to hear this one more time. Their healing is not your responsibility. You are not the cure for their fear. You are not the exception that finally makes them commit. You are not the one who can outlove their avoidance. And I know how hard that is to accept, because it feels like if you just tried harder, if you just loved deeper, maybe it would finally click. But love doesn't work that way. True love cannot exist inside a cycle of running and chasing, hot and cold, half in and half out. What does exist, though, is your choice. You get to choose boundaries. You get to choose peace. You get to choose a love that doesn't leave you overanalyzing texts at 2 a.m. or begging for crumbs of attention. You deserve a love that feels safe, consistent, and whole. Now, will some avoidance change? Yes. We've seen it in the stories, through loss, through boundaries, through their own rock bottom. But notice the pattern. They didn't change because someone saved them. They changed because life forced them to face themselves. And until that moment comes, no amount of chasing will make it happen sooner. So here's your empowerment. Your job is not to make them stay. Your job is to honor your worth so clearly that whether they rise to meet you or walk away, you win. Because both outcomes set you free. I want to leave you with a reflection. Imagine a future version of yourself, 5 years from now. Do you want to look back and remember years of waiting, hoping, settling for someone who never gave you their whole heart? Or do you want to look back and know that you chose yourself? That you walked away from half love to make room for the real thing? That choice starts now. So if you've been struggling, let this be your wake-up call, not to fix them, but to reclaim you. You are not too much. You are not too needy. You are not impossible to love. You are simply asking for the love you deserve. And the right person won't make you beg for it. If this message resonated with you, take a second to breathe it in. Let it settle. And then share your story in the comments. Because I promise you, there are thousands of people right now watching this who feel exactly the way you do. Your story could be the thing that makes them feel less alone. And if you want more conversations like this, raw, real, and healing, make sure to subscribe. Because we're just getting started. There's so much more to unpack about love, relationships, and reclaiming your power. Remember this: avoidants stop avoiding only when life forces them to face themselves. Your job is not to save them. Your job is to save yourself. And when you do that, you'll never lose.